Good morning. Vice Rector Munch, Professor Cronenberg, Professor Schlee, distinguished guests. I don't think I've been in a room with so many professors, or almost exclusively so many professors, since I was taking part in hiring discussions in the government department of Dartmouth College, and I sincerely hope that this is a warmer and friendlier crowd. I really want to thank the three directors of CASAS for the invitation to deliver this keynote, and I want to also just say that I want to express my admiration for what you've done here. This is a compliment shrouded in a bit of a critique. Strategic culture in Europe and perhaps in Washington as well is nothing like what it was when I first arrived in Europe in 1990. It was a far richer thing. It was a big industry. Perhaps it was too big an industry. But you know, the shock of February 22, the invasion of Ukraine, I think it has awoken us to the deficiencies of the strategic conversation. And I want to take my hat off to CASAS for being a leader in this regard, and really, even well before that, having established a quality of discussion and a center of gravity that exists in very few other places. So congratulations for that. I don't know if you knew when you invited me, but I lived just a few blocks from here. A little more than 35 years ago. I'm sorry to advertise my age, but I arrived as a correspondent for Time magazine, and I'd been sent in as a reinforcement to help cover German unification. I lived on Bonner Talweg, Ecke Weberstraße. And I haven't been back in Bonn much since the mid-1990s, so a lot of memories have come rushing back, and I should add that those memories were leavened with other long-forgotten sensations. The other night I went out to get dinner from the hotel we're staying at, and I wound up standing in the rain trying to cross the railway tracks to get to the Südstadt. And one train came after another, and I got wetter and wetter, and it was a really very Bonn experience. Being in Germany in the early 90s, truly one felt as if history was a physical force carrying one forward every day. Great statesmen negotiated major agreements, and people on both sides of the Innerdeutsche Grenze pondered a new reality that no one had expected. It seemed as though everything at that time was possible. Of course, we should recall that there were also questions about the fate of the transatlantic relationship. I hope some of you are old enough to recall that 200,000 people demonstrated in the Hofgarten in January of 1991 against the invasion of Iraq that year, an American action that many of us thought was the epitome, the very inbegriff of a just response to a clear case of aggression, in that case, the invasion of Kuwait. And that moment has passed, and a lot has happened since then. But as was said by Minister Leminski, yes, things seem to be accelerating in a pretty dramatic way, and in the last 10 months, we have come to places we seldom expected. So the question that was posed, the transatlantic relationship, is it time for a requiem? This is what I was asked to speak about. My instinctive response was, oh no. No, first and foremost, because a requiem is one of the most massive and overwhelming pieces of music known. Just a couple of years ago, I heard the Berlin Philharmonic play the Dvorak Requiem, which is a fabulous piece of music, but it does go on for an hour and a half. In that case, actually, it was an hour and 45 minutes. Berlioz's Requiem uses an orchestra of staggering size, 16 timpani alone. And with the chorus, you can have 400 or more performers on stage. That's extreme, but for many composers, the Requiem is as grand a genre as you can get, and it conveys, of course, the ultimate finality, the separation of the living from the dead. And I would venture that we are not there yet. Others may say, with some justification, that we are at a parting of the ways. Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, that cornerstone of mutual defense, is in doubt. I seriously question whether any European leader truly and firmly trusts the United States under Donald Trump to come to his or her country's defense in the case of an attack. Although it has to be said that Trump has been more positive about Article 5 than in the last few months than he had been in his first term. But the centerpiece of U.S. foreign policy now is trade, and that has led the U.S. to treat its closest friends as subjects for coercion. The endless waffling on support for Ukraine, the cozying up to Vladimir Putin, despite a succession of rather rude slights and flat refusal to sign up for Trump's peace efforts, all these point to a parting of the ways. The list of other offenses that might make Europeans understandably think we are at the end of the line is long. The bullying of Denmark, threatening remarks about the future of Greenland, would be absurd if it wasn't so nerve-wracking. The attacks on the international system, the flagrant disregard for human rights at home and abroad, the derision of climate change, the affection for authoritarians like Viktor Orban over Democrats. One can go on, and yet I think we are not at game over yet. For several reasons. First, European leaders have, perhaps at some slight cost to their self-respect, shown that they can manage Trump toward better outcomes than might have been the case. Their intervention in August in the Oval Office, quite a tableau that was, after Trump's rendezvous with Putin in Alaska, and through other calls and meetings have helped prevent the U.S. from seeking to dictate terms to Ukraine. Moreover, the ability to keep U.S. weapons flowing, albeit paid for with European cash, has also been a success. Of course, with Trump, you never know when things will change. The abrupt downturn in Canadian relations with the U.S. just in the last few days, I should say U.S. relations with Canada, in the last few days after the airing of a perfectly legitimate ad that rebroadcasts remarks of Republican icon Ronald Reagan, then denouncing tariffs, is a case in point. Truly anything can happen. Yet there are several reasons why Germany and Europe in general should avoid a breach with the U.S. And some of those reasons have to do with U.S. actions and others with European needs. Let's start with the U.S. I'll be blunt. American strategy doesn't make a lot of sense, and we are likely headed into a dead end. The man who came to power in 2017 for his first term, railing against the threat of China, has been focusing national energies on the Caribbean and blowing up small boats, and set aside the illegality of that, a subject for another day, that may be carrying drugs. Trump reportedly has authorized covert action against the Maduro regime in Venezuela and is pressuring the Colombian government as well. Now, I would be the last to poo-poo the narcotics issue, which has been epidemic in the United States and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. But the problem isn't principally in Latin America, and force will not solve it. At the same time, our policy towards China, the country that it is virtually universally agreed poses the greatest long-term challenge, makes even less sense. One day each week, it looks like we're on a collision course with China, but for the rest, Trump is complimenting Xi and seems to be begging them to come to the table to make a trade deal. As many China hawks, including a whole bevy of them in the administration, are quietly lamenting, the confrontation or the challenge of the PRC seems not to be taken seriously. And just to mention a few facts, the US has spent decades courting India as the foremost partner, the most important national partner to hem in China, and yet Trump seems to have thrown away all that work because his tariffs were more important. Now, never say never. My guess is there will be some kind of rapprochement, but it was an extraordinary thing that would be unimaginable under any other administration. Similarly, as the New York Times has just reported, years of steady, mutually beneficial improvement in relations with Vietnam seem to be going up in smoke. Disaffected by his unpredictability, the Vietnamese are now getting closer to Russia and even archenemy China again. So, as we say in the US, go figure. Perhaps an explanation is that Trump ultimately is not much worried about security issues. His fundamental goal is to change America, not so much the world, and his trade policy is at the heart of that effort. America first is first and foremost about the US economy, and Trump seems to believe that the effort towards economic transformation, Some think he wants some kind of version of autarky, which hasn't worked so well elsewhere. But Trump seems to believe it will not be advanced by the traditional American means of helping provide security to allies, but by edging towards a spheres of influence strategy. Writing on that activity in the Caribbean, but with more focus on Trump's neglect of the Russian threat to Europe, David Ignatius pointed out in the Washington Post, when you look at the threat matrix around the world, it seems Trump has his priorities upside down. I think that's generous. Other analysts are equally critical. Writing in Foreign Affairs, Karen Yarchimilo, many of you may know, the Dean of Columbia's School of International Public Affairs, gives a devastating account of how the president is undermining American credibility. As she notes, for decades, U.S. foreign policy has depended on our credibility, the belief that Washington would honor its commitments and that its past behavior signaled future conduct. Donald Trump, in contrast, she says, has abandoned all efforts to make Washington reliable or consistent. His belief, she adds rightly, is that by keeping friends and foes off balance, the president believes he can secure quick wins. Put it another way, Trump, to a degree unique among modern leaders, looks for the political equivalent of instant gratification. His constant tallying of all the conflicts he has resolved, are we at 8, 9, 10 now? In bolstering his argument for a Nobel Prize, his boasts about the billions of foreign investment that have been promised are all cases in point. That same instinct for the immediate over the medium and the long term erodes America's true assets, its partnerships and alliances. And as Yarchimilo writes, in the long term, Trump's approach to global politics is not likely to strengthen the country, but eventually governments will look to protect themselves by aligning with others. The United States' list of adversaries will accordingly grow, its alliances will weaken. Washington, in other words, could find itself even more isolated without any clear path to reestablishing its reputation. I think the best you can say is US policy right now may make sense for Trump, politically, momentarily, but not for our national interests. So, to anticipate the criticism, some of you may say I'm doing a good job arguing the case for a requiem. After all, why put up with this kind of treatment? But given where Europe is right now, I don't believe a breach in the security relationship makes great sense. It's not in Europe's interest to say goodbye just yet. Trump, I think to the chagrin of many of my colleagues in Democratic administrations, did crack the code and get Europe to invest in its own defense, unpretty as that was. One can wonder if anyone will reach 5% of defense in GDP spending, especially with America at 2.7%. But Germany, and I hope the rest of Europe, despite fiscal issues, will be on their way to taking care of their own security. It will take many years. The lengthy discussion of the need for a US backstop for peacekeeping in Ukraine demonstrates as much. Even if the quality of the security guarantee is in question, as discussed earlier, why would one want to do anything to hasten a breach, especially one that might prove tempting to adversaries? That might achieve some emotional satisfaction and more clarity, but the reality would be unwanted. Europe should press full steam ahead on its own defense, but it should maintain the view that it is doing so as part of the Atlantic Alliance. It should do so because at some point I believe the US will circle back. A great American economist named Herb Stein, who had been chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under Presidents Nixon and Ford, once put forward a very simple proposition that has come to be known as Stein's Law. It states, if something cannot go on forever, it will stop. He was thinking about things like the ratio of debt to GDP, but I think it applies to foreign policy as well. At some point, the costs of our current foreign policy will force a return to a more traditional and predictable approach. I can't promise that America won't be significantly damaged in the process. It may well be. But the domestic implications of Trump's policies will ultimately change the political calculus. For a hint at how that might happen, I recommend you read yesterday's reporting in the New York Times on the state of Iowa, where the economy is contracting fast because the Chinese aren't buying American soybeans. Maybe this trip to Asia will change that. And manufacturing of agriculture machinery is way down. Meat packing plants have been hard hit by labor shortages due to immigration enforcement. Iowans have been very strong red supporters of Trump, but they are angry that the administration is underwriting a bailout of Argentina, which in turn is selling its soybeans to China. And they are angry that the administration says it will deal with high beef prices by importing from abroad. I'm not suggesting this is a turning point, far from it. The Chinese may sell soybeans, and perhaps Trump will reverse on importing beef. But there is a pattern here, and it is corrosive. Americans voted for Donald Trump to make the economy better. And just to raise another example, I don't think that they are thrilled that in a simple fit of pique at Canada, thousands and thousands of jobs have been put in peril. Maybe my view is optimistic. I'm an American after all. I can't tell you that American democracy is not in danger or that things might not go terribly, terribly wrong. We might well become completely absorbed by our cultural conflicts. And if you followed the polling, a depressing number of Americans now think violence may be required to get us back on track as a nation. But the record is that autocrats and would-be autocrats, for the most part, don't hold power forever. And when the madness passes, I pray the United States will again continue its 250-year experiment in democracy. European nations, if they can keep the wolf of the far right away from their door, will again make natural partners. We don't step into the same river twice, but we will still have more in common than any other community of nations. So what kind of music should we be playing, if not a requiem? Right now, I'd recommend a few short and sad pieces, perhaps Satie or Schumann, and perhaps a few discordant pieces, like those of America's first globally renowned composer, Charles Ives. One might have their own suggestions, I'm all ears. But let's hold off playing the requiem just right now. Thank you very much, and I'd be delighted to take a few questions.